I think Christianity comes at it from the other way, and there's a reward in it and there's a risk in it. The reward in it, Christianity says you believe the thing, therefore you do the thing. Judaism says you do the thing, therefore you believe the thing.
Wow.
Right, so
you take the prescription and you will experience God.
Right.
Christianity, experience God, experience Christ in your heart.
And because you're doing
now,
that, then you'll do the good thing.
You do the right thing.
Right. And so the problem, cool. the reward of that is that the access point in some ways for Christianity is a lot easier, right? You experience a transcendent moment, and now the transcendent moment is supposed to animate your life. The danger is transcendent moments disappear real fast, right?
Okay, howdy do, Iron Disciples, brothers of the fold, my fellow hombres that love Jesus. We got a fun thing here today. A couple weeks ago, I saw Ben Shapiro doing an interview with Russell Brand, and it's interesting because you see Ben kind of talking about what he thinks Christians sort of are, how they're different from Judaism, from the Jews. And you also get a little insight to Russell. So there's a couple good little points in here that he hits. So we'll go ahead and start the video. Any comments, Joey, before we start from watching?
Russell Brand is a powerhouse, bro. I saw him on, what's the dude who did Religious or Religion?
Oh, what is that guy's name? He's a dude with his own team.
Yeah. Bill Maher. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, Bill Maher. He's got like this little... podcast is watching Fred Durst on it, and it's called like something. It's kind of funny. It's like him in his house hanging out. And anyway, Russell Brand came on, and dude's just a eloquent. His
syntax,
his vocabulary is impressive.
Yeah,
his command of the English language is impressive.
Yeah, he's quick with his words witty. Too. You got it. Like I'll be left in the dust listening to him.
Yeah, every word he says has like
some heavy
4 vowels in it and 10 consonants.
Yeah. He's kind of like a weird leprechaun.
He is.
Language, yeah.
He totally is. Swordsman.
Definitely. Yeah, he's doing some good stuff. I've watched him several places and feel like he's on a good crusade.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
All right.
So again, I think that goes to the fundamental human good, meaning that if the idea of epistemic humility, that you should epistemological humility, that you should be humble in how you approach issues, and maybe you could be wrong.
Yeah,
I totally agree, and that I think is an issue, as I say, sometimes of morality, but very often of pragmatism. You just don't know. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, there are limits to that. So, for example, you wouldn't say, a person who is holding a slave, well, no problem. I mean, he's living how he wants to live. There are certain fundamental values that overrun the sort of cultural, the sort of global libertarianism.
And yet that is an example of a value that contemporaneously to the construction of these ideologies was literally accepted as ordinary.
Not to get into the sort of biblical analysis of slavery, but one of the I think most honest ways to read the Bible is as a document that was given to a particular set of people at a particular time, meaning that you have to look at what it's attempting to transform. Meaning if you look at the slavery and the society surrounding, it's a much more liberalized version of slavery that's in the Bible, and therefore a step toward the abolition of slavery, which is exactly how it's been read by every abolitionist preacher in the 19th century. It's been read by...
What do you mean, Israelites, Egypt stuff?
Yes, that, and also even the scriptural, injunctions with regard to you own a slave. How long do you keep the slave? Do you for example, not to get too specifically biblical, but there's a whole section in the Bible where it talks about you are your master's servant, and 7 years go up. At the end of 7 years, you are automatically freed. Right? You can't have a term longer than 7 years in the Bible, and you are given a choice. Do you want to stay with your master or do you want to leave? And so the Bible says that if you want to stay, then we take an awl and we put it through your ear and we give you essentially an ear piercing. Okay, so it's a punishment. The idea is that you should have gone free. There's something wrong with you if you decide to stay in bondage. That's as opposed to the Code of Hammurabi. In the Code of Hammurabi, it's the opposite. If a slave attempts to escape and then is returned to the master, then the master puts the awl through his ear to demonstrate that he owns the slave. So in the Bible, it becomes a flip scenario where it's trying to encourage freedom. And again, it's speaking to a culture in which slavery is commonplace. And so the most honest way to read the Bible is to look at it as both an eternal guarantee in particular areas where it's speaking to basic human nature, and also as a transformative document to the customs of a time, because any document that you give is...
So I thought that was really cool. There's a ton of issues people bring up slavery. Like, does the Bible endorse it when you hear Paul talking in his epistle Philemon, he's representing Philemon to a convert. I believe it was in Corinthia.
End of Ephesians 2, yeah.
Yeah, and he's representing him and saying, 6, take him back, don't give him any trouble. He's talking on behalf of the slave to the master. And, you see these little, where the tendency is towards. And I really like the way Ben said, this is for certain people at a certain time. And that's not saying like it's a dispensation, meaning it's particularized for those people specifically and non-applicable to our times, because it is applicable in the way that they're dealing with the issues, not so much the prescriptions on behalf of those times, which are very specific because their problems were slightly different than ours are now. But to have that method of reading it is so important so that we can see that the Bible is not, in fact, endorsing slavery. It's not saying slavery is okay. It's tending towards freedom for the slave and fair treatment for the slave. So it makes it a lot more easy to swallow when you read through it, although it's not explicit, slavery is wrong. You see throughout all the scriptures that handling somebody unfairly is wrong, and there's going to be repercussions for that if you don't do that. So I like the owl. That was definitely cool. He said the other tradition, I believe that was Babylonian, where they put the owl in first, was way different because they had traditions that meant that you were a permanent slave. So the Jews kind of did stand out in a way, and we would never know that if we didn't kind of dig in and do some research.
Yeah, and what is slavery? I venture far. Some of my friends have ventured far, like I know Luke or Oliver, they'd say that with the way that taxes and property rights exist now, that you don't really own anything, and that slavery can go deeper. Oh, it kind of hides behind a
different kind of thing, right?
Yeah, then you outright are my slave,
Yeah.
Like if 7 years, if you think about it, and you were a slave, and all your student debt and everything else kind of like disappeared, doesn't sound so bad, does it?
No, but it doesn't. And you never really own your house unless you stop, if you stop paying your taxes. These kind of freedoms, they sound like you own it. You sound like you have these things, but do you really? No, not
It's a
really.
good question to ponder.
It is.
When you're pointing the finger.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of work are you doing? Anyway, that's a really good conversation to have because many of the, like Felix, the man who ended up judging Paul before Festus when he was grabbed up by the Jews towards the end of his ministry, Felix was a slave, grew up as a slave, and his brother was a free man. So he got Felix out, and as Felix grew, into a free man by earning it and stuff, that never left his side, the fact that he was a slave, and people actually sort of respected him more because of his background as a slave. Mm-hmm. He was known for being incredibly witty and also like a lying sack of turds. Mm-hmm. So interesting.
Sack of turds.
Sack of turds, man. He was the kind of guy, apparently, when you read back, he would manipulate people very well. Mm-hmm. So even good people, he could make them look bad. Like he was a very good politicizer. Very, very talented.
I can't speak the language of astrophysics to people living in 1500 BCE. Right? So that I think is a...
So it has to be simultaneously allegorical while taking into account that it has
the practicality,
contemporary
yeah, and also you
application.
have to and you have to apply human reason to it in the sense that what you're looking at very often is issues of human nature versus inerrant human nature. Right? Human nature just exists. So, for example, do not murder is an all-time rule. Right? That's not a transformative rule where murder is really common, so we're trying to minimize that. It's like, no, human beings want to murder, you're not allowed to murder. That's an all-time rule. As opposed to certain rules that are obviously an attempt to curb the worst practices of the time, maybe in pursuit of something better down the road. And so that's hard. I mean, it takes human reason to apply to it, and this is why Judaism has, an entire corpus of laws and regulations that are deterministic on this. I think that the thing that, as a partisan in Judaism, the thing that I say that Judaism brings to the table, and I think that Judaism and Christianity come at it from opposite sides, and I'll make the case for Judaism, obviously.
No way.
Yeah, exactly. I'm
leaving.
Spoiler alert.
I didn't come here for Judaism.
Is that what Judaism is really about, and you mentioned the commandments, and you kind of said, there's the commandments and there's making God real in your everyday life. That's what the commandments are supposed to do. So what Judaism says is that you are a human being with the capacity for great good and the capacity for great evil, right? You have literally the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov. You have a desire for good and you have a desire for evil, and these two things are battling in you literally at all times. And what your job is to do is, regardless of what you believe, you do the thing. The thing that is in front of you is the thing that you do. Right, so we have this arcane set of rules, and this arcane set of rules is made to reify the presence of God in your life. And even if you don't recognize that's what it's doing, by you doing these things over and over, you are cultivating virtue through action. So it's like you reach God by doing the thing, whereas I think that Christianity almost comes at it backwards.
And through ceremony.
Right, exactly.
Through your behavior.
Through ritual, through all these things. And Christianity comes at it.
Can you do that speaking Hebrew chanting?
I mean, yes, but it wouldn't be entertaining to anybody. And then
you can't do it. You do that as part of your life. Could you reckon you could have been a rabbi?
I mean, there was a time when I was interested in being a rabbi, right? Coming out of high school.
Sort of are one, aren't you?
In a way. I mean, I have a lot of young Orthodox Jews who listen to the show for sure. But it's and I love studying the Bible and
that is where you would go for guidance. If it came to it, if it comes to a crisis with your children, or a crisis in your marriage, or a crisis in your heart, you're going to Judaism. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. Yeah. I think that's fair. I mean, in my understanding of Judaism, obviously, because who else's would apply? But it's I think Christianity comes at it from the other way, and there's a reward in it and there's a risk in it. The reward in it, Christianity says you believe the thing, therefore you do the thing. Judaism says you do the thing, therefore you believe the thing.
Wow.
Right. So
Judaism, you take the prescription and you will experience God.
Right.
Christianity, experience God, experience Christ.
And because
in your
you're
heart
doing
now,
that, then you'll do the good thing.
You do the right thing.
Right. And so the problem, cool. the reward of that is that the access point in some ways for Christianity is a lot easier, right? You experience a transcendent moment, and now the transcendent moment is supposed to animate your life. The danger is transcendent moments disappear real fast, right? You have a transcendent moment, and right now you're feeling God, and then 5 minutes from now you are not feeling God, right? I mean, if that's the message of the Book of Exodus, where they receive the Torah, the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai.
Okay, so he's kind of talking about the differences as he sees it. What's animating the believer versus Judaism and Christianity. And for Judaism, the law is animating the person and leading them closer to God, whereas in Christianity, it's God who's led into you, and then his spirit is animating you and informing you personally as to what the laws are, and more specifically they are. But that's not the complete story, is it?
No.
There's more to it.
Well, even if you look at it in the Old Testament, like with Abraham, Abraham was approached by God and called out to be his chosen people. Of course, there was deals and agreements to be
covenants,
covenants that initiated that bond to grow, and then promises to be made.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think it's kind of maybe for more of what he's saying is like for them in their day-to-day life, they view it more as like actions, and then belief comes afterwards. Like, do this because it's right to do.
Yeah.
And then the belief comes after it. And like I see like if he's gonna, even with like the Jews and he's bringing up the calf, Baal calf, that they made in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
They did that after they had seen the Red Sea part.
Right, incredible miracles right before their face.
And they had seen all the plagues on Egypt. They had seen like tons of stuff done,
right?
And yet they still lost faith.
And so that would be like Ben saying a Christian goes to church, or a person of no faith goes to church. They have an intense conversion moment, very, very emotional. They have the Spirit of God touch them, and then they go back to their daily lives, and they forget how to employ obedience. They forget how to employ surrender to God. So those are the points that I think Ben's forgetting, and including, and there's another point too. There's 2 points. Is for many of us that have walked with the Lord for more than I'd say 2 years, you're going to experience ups and downs, and the only thing that sustains you through those ups and downs is making sure you're submitted to Christ and obedient. And so he calls you to do certain things, and that's going back to the covenants and the promises. So you will become a temple. You will become a high priest. That's his promise now that we have the Holy Ghost. That in effect, is going to convict your spirit to do things as he's instructing you. So the real question you have to ask yourself is, am I obeying as he's telling me to do these things? Am I submitting as he's telling me to do these things, regardless of the emotional sort of, and I tell people this all the time, your conversion experience is like your wedding day. You know, you don't have tons of wedding days. It's a one very special, beautiful time in your life that's accompanied with that emotion, that sensory sort of just extremities, but it's not what to expect for the rest of your life as a Christian.
Yeah, that's a great point, because like I was just thinking about like the difference between like Judaism or even like Orthodox, different Orthodox Christianities, whether that's Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and versus like Judaism, and how they're similar, and comparing them to what I believe our man Ben Shapiro is comparing to like more of the current evangelical Christian, where you come into church and it's much more like the wedding day. It's like you're in love, you have your honeymoon phase, there's all these emotions and these endorphins, and you're on drugs. Versus growing up being steeped in it, when the Catholics, they have to do their sacraments. I'm sure you don't want to do half that shit when you're a kid. He had to learn how to do all kinds of like reciting of the Torah. You have to memorize stuff. You have to like work to build this bond. You know, you're really putting in this investment when you're a kid. When you'd rather be out playing with your friends, you have to wear this weird little hat when everyone else gets to gel their hair and do whatever they want to do. You have to be like an altar boy on Sundays, and there's a lot of different, like, when you're young, there's this, you're steeped in it, you know, and you don't get a choice, really. It's like your parents like, this is what you are. It's like the movie we watched, Little Chupa, you know, he's a Mexican kid living in Kansas, you know, he wants to assimilate, but then he goes back and he starts to, like, you know, really have this sort of respect for his identity, whether or not he's wherever he's is. And that's the confidence that type of stuff brings you, whether you're anywhere in the planet, wherever you're at, right? You feel like, I know what I am because I bled for it. But I feel like he's comparing it to the fickleness of the evangelicals, to where it's just like, and we talk about this a lot, it's like this emotionalism, it's this hype thing. It's like, oh, you know, you got to be on fire for the Lord every day. And if you're not, then the Lord's, you know, not there. Or this transition just doesn't come along with what we're, I guess, what we're leading into, whether or not the faith is based on works, you know, or it's based on faith and our gift, which I think is an unfair contrast, because we talked about this morning. It's like salvation gets you in the door, but it certainly doesn't give you all the other things that you could get when you get into heaven, the closeness that you could have with God, you know, the crowns, there's different things that are talked about, right? So like you get into college, but you don't get that 4.0 GPA, you know what I mean?
Well, I think the important thing to realize as a believer is that what's the difference between the law and the new covenant? There's these two promises that are set forward. The law is very easily described and sometimes missed in the book of Job. So in the book of Job, you see a man who is faultless, and this man carries out he carries out the law perfectly. And if you'll notice, there's many times when Job is being sort of self-reflective, you'll be like, or he's being analyzed, like when his wife comes up to him, it's like, you should curse God and die. And it says Job did not sin with his lips. So Job had knowledge of God, like it says in Hosea. He had the sacrifice. He had knowledge of the law, but he had no knowledge of God himself. And so that is the same struggle that Jesus had with the Pharisees, were these men who had knowledge of the law, and this was something they did. They provided and saw themselves as the progenitor, the means, the motivating means, the actual resource of the power and energy was themselves. And so it allowed them to do these good deeds, stack up this sort of works-based faith, and that became a source of pride and a stumbling block. It actually, there's a great verse here in Isaiah I read this morning, which I wanted to bring up, and I'll read the whole passage because it's really interesting. It says, "To whom will he teach knowledge, and to whom will he explain the message? Those who are weaned from the milk? those who take from the breast, for it is precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. For by people of strange lips and with a foreign tongue the Lord will speak to his people, to whom he has said, this is rest. Give rest to the weary, and this is repose. Yet they would not hear, and the word of the Lord will be to them precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little, that they may go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. And that is the old covenant's misgiving, right? There's no grace there. There's no Christ, the Holy Spirit animating you. That leaves the door open for pride and actually worshiping the law. Mm-hmm. So when you have a conversion, say, for instance, the sensational evangelical sort of, unfortunately, sort of shallow, you might say, it's because of a lack of education. So that's where the traditions are necessary, and that's where people who've experienced the Eastern Orthodox, the Catholic Church, they have that, like you said, some of that cultural background that steadies them during the lows, because you're going to rely on that stuff. So if you have a conversion and you don't go into reading your Bible, you're not going to have the full armor of Christ. You're not going to understand exactly how to encourage yourself in those moments, have Christ encourage you, and you're going to start to have that slow ebb back into the world. And it's not going to be a good thing. Mm-hmm. So they're important, but the point that I think he's missing there is that although it's not as present in the evangelical church, because we don't lift up works as the means to an end, it doesn't mean that works don't play a role in our life. Yeah,
that's right. Salvation is your key, your pass into heaven. But once you get there, it's like there's a lot more that's going on within the hierarchy and what you lived and what you've done that matters. Like, for instance, Judgment Day. There wouldn't be a Judgment Day if it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. It'd just be like you're saved, and that's that. And that's why a lot of people see Christianity as being hypocritical, because you just pray and forgive for your sins, and that is not the way it really works. You have to have a repentant heart. Yeah. So I can definitely see where he's coming at, but I just, like you said, that's evangelical. It's more of the modern day westernized church, as opposed to a lot of the Orthodox traditions, which have been going on a long time as well.
They're evangelical at best. They're just
as well as him, like, making it seem like Jews historically have just been like work first, when a lot of their miracles came first. A lot of those miracles came first, and then the belief came afterwards. Mm-hmm. So it's not exactly fair what he's saying, I don't believe.
No, and the evangelicals, they have that there. It's in their Bible. It's in the same place. They're going to find those same rules and precepts, the things that Christ said you have to do. Prayer, reading, internalizing the word, these different things that Paul talks about.
Then it goes farther, like
your armor, your sword, the way that you conduct yourself in the world, where the battlefront actually is. And it's a misunderstanding of the context, because like the Old Testament rules, I wanted to touch on this in the beginning. It was in my notes, but a lot of people think this is an exhaustive collection of rules, and it's not. Really, in those days, what they do is they teach people by saying, this is the way we handled this particular situation. So what people are supposed to learn from them is how they handled it, not necessarily exactly what they handled, because those things will be changing, as Ben said, with the times. There's going to be different situations that occur, but the way that we tackle it, the way we deal with it, is different.
with procedure, and a lot of times what they're trying to get at is approach, or a more of a holistic view of the matter, instead of saying, this is the procedure to go down, this is the exact ordered line of rules, or this is the recipe exactly.
Yeah, that's why in Hosea it says, I desire knowledge of God, not sacrifice. So in the same thing, it's precept against precept. It's like you can have all those things memorized, but that's not the point. The point is not to have all
with Rolo. We were talking
numbers and
week.
The actual canon. That's the law. Like, here's what you do, here's what you don't do. You're supposed to contextualize that, and from that body of teachings, understand how to apply what they're teaching you from that perspective. Not in this is what you do in this point. It's how to handle things with the current. It's supposed to be applied no matter what generation you're in.
Mm-hmm. There's a bit of that that's important, and like we were contrasting this with Rollo on Saturday, and it's exactly what happened with Jesus and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and what, for instance, the evangelicals would say is wrong with the Orthodox churches, or any type of progressive movement, how they're kind of getting away from the old and embracing this new, and either they take the baby out of the bathwater or they embrace a bit of both, which is what you should do. You should take in both at the same time, not completely get rid of the baby. You want to keep him around just to get rid of the bathwater.
Yeah.
But what's more important is, like, we say baby is because a baby is a new life, right? The baby is a new life. That old water is the dirt and the crust and the garbage from the old life, right? So we want to get rid of that shiza, but we want to keep the life that's still living, that new life, and then encourage that, right? That's the idea. So when we look at the Bible, or we look at like certain rules, that's what kept that what actually might have taken that dirt and that garbage off, because that's what rules are going to be doing. They're going to be like that distilling factor, or that soap, in the water. It's going to take it off, but it's not going to get rid of the new grime. It's not going to help that baby grow at the same time. So sometimes those rules are important. It's important to have rules, but then we end up, if we just cling to those, the baby's going to die, and we're going to actually be having a dead religion or a dead God, or like what the Pharisees were having. They couldn't even understand what Christ was talking to them about, because they were so ingrained in what they believed to be the rules, the structure, which are words. And these words are great. You can say, that's beautiful, and when you say that's beautiful, you're saying it brings me pleasure. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's nice to the eye, it brings goodness to what surrounds it, right? But at the same time, if you use too many words to describe some things that are miraculous, like if you try to describe music, for instance, or you just try to describe like what your wife means to you, or what my brother means to me, words are never going to ever cut it. They're never going to be as precise as what the actual song is telling me, or what the actual relationship is. It's not that those things are just so ethereal that you can't really put your finger on it. They're so precise that words don't work for them. So we do that with religion, and we do that with God sometimes. We'll put him in that little nice, fun box that it's not so fun, but it's a safe place, So I think it's really important to have both, because we were talking about the sacraments and how kind of you were saying that those kind of nice, right? Like it kind of would have been cool.
We have sacraments. So like the evangelicals have sacraments. They have baptism. They have, the idea of rebirth. Prayer is a sacrament. Sacrament's just a term for saying, here's the things that you need to do in order to fulfill your faith. Mm-hmm. And so I think for a lot of people who are evangelical, it's an issue with education. They're not really taking in their Bible. Mm-hmm. So you do have to do deep study, and the study of words is important. So like contextualizing the Old Testament's of essential value. The whole reason why we read old stuff is to see how that stuff worked out, because right now in the present we're living in a place to see, what did this stuff do? Mm-hmm. Did it work or not? Mm-hmm. Back in those days we had slavery. Now we don't. Why did that happen? Because of the presence of the Bible. We also had issues with communication between men and women. Now we don't have that as much. So we look at these old cultures to see that they weren't like us now. Mm-hmm. And what are the actual changes? What inspired those changes to bring us to where we are now? Because we take it for granted, and we're always subjective with the way we look at that book. Is like their circumstances are similar to ours. That might be true for certain things, but for other things, absolutely not. So that's going to give us a sort of faith builder experience where we say, okay, why am I learning about these old people, these old traditions, these old laws? Well, you're going to see that they actually changed humanity completely, did some quantum leaps involved here. And the words are important for that. But that's why we worship an ultimate God, because those words ultimately he's going to give us new words to describe things. He's going to give us a brand new mind for these things.
Historically,
we're going to have a wonderful
to describe
sort of
new things.
We're going to have a wonderful sort of just rebirth of explanation of these things, like love, virtuous words. They never die; they just keep growing. And you get a new perspective on it, and you're just mind blown. It's the best feeling that humans get is when they get a transcendent moment like that, and they're all of a sudden inspired again, and sort of the proverbial fire is lit. But you only get that through paying attention to the word, the context, the people, the communication. And what's interesting about hearing Ben talk about this is you get an idea for what people are actually getting. And that's important for us because we can live in our own little island, our iron disciples, where you start to think everybody reads the Bible the way I do. Everybody's doing deep study the way I am. That's not true. This is what the people are actually seeing from the evangelicals. They have a very, sensory-based conversion that just blows them out of their shoes. And then they kind of revert to their old ways.
Well, it's an emotional conversion. It's
right.
like, it's
so
like the
that's
guy
a
sitting
job
up
for
there.
us.
You feel absolutely compelled. There's tears, there's joy. There's nothing wrong with this stuff.
It's a wedding day event, dude. It's extremely powerful. It is a wedding day. You're actually allowing Christ, the Holy Ghost, into you. So that is like a converging of spirits. It is absolutely that. But for most people who are like, I'm an evangelical, over time, we just want to ask ourselves, what is the job we have to do? How is the rest of the world looking at us, and why? And once we can get that out of the way, we can start working on trying to be better at describing our faith to others. And also, like what the Catholic tradition, which I have respect for them, they have the sacraments and many different things that go in and support the believer as they start to grow. They have an educational process that's not just go do whatever you want, and some people, they like that. Some people, they don't. But I got news for you guys. There are rules. And as Ben's going to explain further, those rules are there so you can have freedom. Because the rules aren't just there to restrict. They're there to restrict the chaos so that you can enjoy freedom. And this is lost on a lot of people because they've never in their lives given themselves up to something that's good. And good, by definition, is restrictive. It restricts the foul. It restricts the corrupt. It restricts the perverted, right? And so you're going to have to burn that out of yourself, as Jordan Peterson says.
Well, you don't want to get rid of all the rules and all the structures. Some of them do have to go. Like, that's just a part of the way it works. Some of that stuff's not applicable today.
Well, some of the rules might be for perversion in your life.
What's important is to see that you do need them, and that when you do progress, you are going to have to make new ones because we're all growing. This world's changing. God's growing. He's a living God. There's going to be new things that we're going to be approached with that old rules aren't going to work for.
That's like I was talking to my buddy Kelly.
It's just like Abraham. Like Abraham didn't get he didn't get the 10 Commandments right off the bat. No. He had Jacob go. I mean, like he had generations, and then here's Moses coming along. He had to go through, a lot of stuff, and then, he goes up, gets the 10 Commandments, and then what happens after the 10 Commandments, right? You get some prophets, right? Then you get a king, and then you get Jesus ultimately, and then so it's just showing you like the people that want to just like hold on to one thing and say that this is the way it's going to be forever. It's like it's true because that there is an ultimate truth, but that ultimate truth is evolving within God's character. And if you can't understand that and be appreciative of that, then you're worshiping a dead God because that God's not living and he's not working and he's not doing things.
And it takes wisdom to do that. I mean, at the bottom of the line, you're going to have the Bible to indicate when you should change those rules because ultimately those rules were probably never supposed to be there. There's some tradition mixed up in there, some legalism, something that made that rule the way you were reacting to that rule. Maybe you were worshiping like they did in a sacrifice, like Job. He's like, I'm going to do everything right. I'm worshiping this process instead of the God who made this process. I'm lacking the intimacy. And God's like, well, you don't know me, so you're going to feel lost when I take everything away from you. And that was Job's sort of test of faith. Does he have faith? You can't have faith unless you know what you're putting faith into. And so that's why God says in Hosea 6:6, I would like knowledge of God rather than sacrifice. And so Christianity is knowledge of God. That's in essence. And it doesn't leave out the rules. It doesn't leave out the traditions. It doesn't leave out some of the stoicism and asceticism and the self-persecution and the I'm going to do the right thing no matter what because I have to. And that never goes away. If anything, it's bolstered by it, right? So it's an important thing that, like I said, I think the biggest thing we can take away here is how the misconception of the evangelicals is, and that's what we're up against, and that's where we need to acknowledge.
Well, he's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And 5 minutes later, they're building a golden calf, right? The transcendent moment ends. You're building a golden calf.
You idiots!
Right?
Well, you're not listening.
Exactly.
Well, no, it's this now. It's this. I think we're going to go with the golden cow.
Exactly.
But the Talmud I've just explained to you.
Exactly. So but I think that the best advice and I think that gap has been sort of closed in the sense that Christianity then re-ritualized a lot of things, right? Christians still go to church even if they're not feeling it that day, or they still are enjoying to give charity even if they're not feeling it that day.
All discipline is this.
All discipline is this. But so I think that when it comes to raising kids, to get back to the question you asked earlier, it's not enough to provide kids with kind of general principles. You have to give them a thing to do and a purpose and a role to play every single day. I'm very big into the idea that human beings have roles. I don't think that the idea of human beings without roles really exists. I think that a human being living on a desert island by himself is not free. I think he's the greatest prisoner of all. Ask anybody who's been put in solitary confinement how free they are, right? Even if there were no boundaries, even if there were no walls.
Everybody, everything they want, put them in give them $1 billion and let them roam around this world alone with that $1 billion. Good luck.
It's a prison.
No, people crave attention more than anything else.
But what he's actually saying is even attention is a prison. Any of these sort of perverted appetites that become we get fixated on them. They become our obsession. I have to have this. I have to have that. This is going to define my status.
False purposes.
What he's saying, he started in with saying humility in the beginning of this, and it's true. That's not a prerequisite to human, existence. We're not innately humble. But through being humble and following rules, we experience true freedom. And that's what he's getting into now. It's like kind of what set of rules works. Why do these rules go? And the restriction we experience, because everybody's selling the lie these days, and you see it everywhere, is that freedom is no restrictions.
It's a bunch of horse crap.
It's exactly the opposite.
No,
actually.
yeah. Well, you look at just basic education. It's like you don't want to go to school when you're a kid. Those days, and I hated it.
Every day.
I mean, well, there's a lot of.
God.
I can't even tell you how many times there's just like arrogant little turd, and then you do something,
you learn,
and then pretty soon you're like, "This is amazing."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh.
You think you know something, and then you do it.
If your barometer for
great.
what's good to pay attention to is your emotional state, then you are going to be ready to be totally screwed over the rest of your life.
We forget how hardcore it was to be a baby. It's like you're going to walk,
you will be
bro.
a slave to your emotions and to your chemical responses in your brain. Eventually, you'll be on antidepressants. You'll be very unhappy, and you won't know how or why to be.
Well, it's a lie. People are saying something's wrong with you because you're unhappy, and you have all these rules. Now, that's the rule. Like your rule is you have to be happy. Yeah. And what happens is you're not going to feel that way naturally, and so now you got to supplement. Now you got to change.
Bro,
now
I
you got to
like
do
the
all
way
these
liver tastes. I mean, I craved liver, and now I love it. But I mean, same with like coffee. Same with like working out. Same with like Russell said, any discipline. And I think discipline, like what he means by it's like anything that has inherent value in it. That you want to succeed or understand.
And the interesting part about the inherent value part is that it's always going to be challenging. Anything that's like, going down like cakes or whatever, got
None
that high
of the
dopamine
hero archetype
cake.
movies that we
Those
watch
things
are like, it was easy for him and he became Superman. It's like,
even when
even when they
do have superpowers, the challenge for them is learning how to use them, who to help. It's like the decision making. That's the real superpower that they start to grow.
Yeah.
Is the wisdom within how they enact and handle the responsibility. Spider-Man, right? Mm-hmm. But it's cool that he's bringing this up. I love this about the rules. So let's get into it real quick.
There are no doors, right? You're living on a desert island. You're not free. You have to have a role and a thing to do in life. You have to have a purpose and you have to have a meaning, and that comes with rules. Right, that's the uncomfortable part. The purpose comes with a set of rules that, generally speaking, allow you to best achieve that purpose, but on average. I mean, there are always going to be exceptions to the rule, right? There are always going to be a group of people for whom the rules are really, really tough, and it's asking a lot of them, and that's a real challenge. And we as a society have to say, okay, well, the rules still apply, but we understand that you're having a really tough time with the rules. I think one of the things that we've done as a society, however, is we've taken the people to whom the rules are the toughest to apply, and we've said, well, because it's very hard for this person to apply this rule in their life, the rule should just be obliterated, because the rule is very uncomfortable for people. And
I think, if I may interject at this point, Ben.
Yeah, I'm going to just say something Jordan said to me that blew my mind, said directly to me. No, I'm kidding. On one of his videos. I talk like that sometimes, stupid. But anyway, he said that he brought up like a little vignette to express his point, and he said, if you were in an old person's home and the person can't or is struggling to button their T-shirt, don't do it for them. Let them do it, and they need to have the autonomy that they have, even if it's a struggle for them to do. And so, like Shapiro's saying right now, he's like, some rules people are going to have difficulty following more than everybody else. It's going to be a particularly difficult circumstance to subject themselves to a rule.
Maybe they're prone to addiction. Maybe they have like something
going
right?
on, or like
abuses growing up to where like
or a
they
guy's
have,
divorced. In the Bible,
abandonment issues, or
there's tons
trust
of
issues, or any of that stuff.
Take your pick, right? Or somebody who just is angry at the world and now they have to find a way to surrender. Like, you will be one of those people eventually.
A nerd that was
I think
on.
the point is everybody's going to be in that position.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's a health issue or what it is. You're going to have to be in a position where applying the rules to your life is going to feel like life or death. It's a test of faith. That's what the Bible calls it. Test of faith. Just because you got through this one, the next one isn't going to be any easier. It's always just as hard. But the solution to the tests of faith, every single time.
Brutal.
But the solution is not to get rid of the rules, because you actually compound the problem when you get rid of the rules, because you're ignoring it. You can never find a solution.
See, when you say get rid of the rules, it's like
let me finish this thought real quick. So
you don't mean get rid of the rules.
Well, he's saying, like, for instance, with the gender, with these different sort of political issues that we have now, they're getting rid of the rules, but they're imposing harsher ones. So this is the point that I'm kind of making here.
Those are the wrong rules.
When you get rid of when you're so sort of, and this is the bleeding heart syndrome. You have a bleeding heart, somebody's got a problem, and you say, well, you don't really have a problem. What you've done is you've destroyed that person because you've allowed that problem. You're not erasing the problem. The problem's still there, but you've now, the first step in the process to addressing a problem is acknowledging there's a problem. That's the only way you'll be able to deal with finding a solution. So when you eliminate the problem, you'll never have a solution. And so that will destroy people. That'll actually destroy you at the end of the day, because that's willful blindness. That is allowing deception to root in you, and then from that deception, you are now on the path.
What does Jordan say? Crisis averted is crisis compounded.
Exactly.
Something to that nature.
Yeah.
And like, we should be focusing on, besides sexes, is like, let's cut the terms down on senators. Let's eliminate lobbying. Like, let's do some of this shit that needs to be done. But instead, we focus on
that's
more of this
the topic of it being
of choosing the
distraction,
rules. Of choosing rules.
People saying prioritizing
choosing
problems
rules.
And saying, like, what is
what's
an important
outdated?
problem? Well, the thing
what
is,
needs to be paid attention
the
to?
bleeding heart always will win, because the bleeding heart says this person's in pain.
Some
it's
people
hard
will
for
say
somebody
that's because
to say,
we live in a feminized culture.
Like one time a year, people are pissed. It's tax time. Oh, look at how much they're taking. 2 weeks later, they're back to the same old thing. If they saw how much
gas prices go up,
right? If they saw how much these politicians were siphoning and the inside lobbying, and you actually made the bleeding heart look at the gash wound that these guys are doing, that's going to take a lot of work for most. But seeing some kid who's being abused in school and says that he's had suicidal thoughts because he's a girl but wants is born a boy, that kind of an issue, unfortunately, because of humans'
it's
appetite,
a minority issue.
Well,
when everyone else is getting actually screwed over, everybody else by these other problems, these other rules. Yet the minority is getting all the attention.
Right. And I'd like to point the direction, because
it's not good.
This is something that we have an unhealthy appetite for as people. So we will look at the political dilemmas like this and be like, oh, it's so bad. But the real iron disciple way what we've learned from reading the Bible is that you need to look on the inside and see what kind of problems you're skirting and what kind of problems in your life you're giving more attention to than really deserves, because it's a distraction.
Yeah.
And you got that stuff in your life, guaranteed. It's not going anywhere. What I was saying is, what I was encouraging us to do is, instead of fixating on the political issues, because really it's always the easier issues where it's like, well, he's wrong and he was being a mean dude. Like the hard issues, the complex issues that demand, like, saying, why am I getting up at the same? Why am I eating at the appropriate times? Why am I eating the wrong stuff? Why don't I want to read my Bible for, why am I only reading my Bible for 30 minutes a day? Shouldn't I be reading for like an hour at, the beginning in the night? If I have a wife, why am I reading my Bible with my wife? Why aren't we, those are the issues that people are like, well, we both go to church, right? So we all have these things. It's human nature. And that's the addressing of those problems. That's going to get some of that autonomy so that Christ, the Holy Spirit animating your body is going to actually happen more instead of just being sort of stumbling through, kind of a person, which we don't want to be. We want to be iron disciples in the mind, the body, spirit, actually have that fortitude. That's what we are all sort of after. It's what we should be after.
Yeah. That the values and principles have have been lost and abandoned and subtly replaced by very broad but compelling and somewhat insidious ideas derived from rationalism, such as individualism, progressivism, materialism.
I agree with all of this. I totally agree with this. I mean, so there's a great book called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Truman. I've cited it a lot. And it's, I think, the most important book written in the last 10 years. In which he traces the rise of radical individualism at the beginning of the 19th century, like tail end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. And what he says is that the way that people interacted with the world before, and this goes back to what we were talking about with children, how you have to civilize them, is that who you are, who Russell is, who I am, it's not what I feel inside me. That's really not who I am. Who I am is how I interact with the world, how I interact with the institutions around me. This is what helps create me, shape me, and make me who I am. And so what I feel on the inside of me is significantly less important than what I do and how I act in the world around me. And in the early 19th century, there was a real move, a romantic move, right, toward the place of real truth is the place inside of you. And so if the rest of the world does not mirror back at you what you believe about you, the rest of the world is an imposition on you. Institutions and rules are an imposition and they hurt you. So it used to be that for thousands of years, the idea was rules and institutions protect you, they guide you, they give you purpose, they bring down the wisdom of the past and they help you accept, what the world is. And yeah, there's room to stick and move and we should change the rules and the rules are bad, but the rules exist.
And also some of those baronial and feudalistic states may have been somewhat exploitative. From
100%.
agriculture onwards, the possibility for exploitation radically increases. And you can also, I believe, see the temptation to further sanctify the intimacy of the experience of God within, because that is ultimately where this experience will be felt. I completely agree with you that if I'm sitting around on my own saying, oh my God, I'm having this transcendent experience of unitary bliss and everything is love, and then I go out and spit in the street and all I think about is whether or not I find me sexually attractive, my experience of God is not very valuable. It's not being transmitted. It's not functional, that it has to have utility, that I have to have a set of values that are applicable in this world, that I have to have duty, that I have to have responsibility. I recognize that. But when I listen to you and your obvious understanding and devoutness...
So I think right there, it's built into the word Christian, right? It's like, you need to emulate Christ. If you don't know what Christ did or who he was or why he's the Messiah, you're not going to emulate anything very well. You're not even going to emulate yourself very well. So it's built into the term we call ourselves, Christian, because there's a lot of people who reject any form of religion because of the rules and the precedents it sets and the control over your life, and it's going to change who I am, even though that should be the goal for the better. And they have spirituality, right? And we've talked about this on the podcast many times before.
Did you get into that yet?
You just did.
Oh,
you go out and spit in the street. You have this transformative experience, and then you're just still worried about the same old stuff. He's talking about like what's qualifying your spiritual experience is the value you bring to the world. What qualifies your spiritual experience is the value you bring to the world. That's how you figure out if what's happened is legitimate or not.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good point, because spiritualism in any direction is not all worth the same.
No. It's like, seek your truth, bro.
Yeah.
But if that
But that is the truth.
But
So
that
it's
is
like,
your truth. And everyone just keeps going down these. And eventually, what is the outcome of that?
chaos.
Well, yeah, because eventually someone's going to get control and be like, well, this is more truth than your truth.
Yeah.
And then there's this conflict. And I think it's cool what he's bringing up. What I was kind of resonating with is like, here's Shapiro, and he's like, bringing down the wisdom with these rules from the past, and with these rules, and then he's marking when the Romantic period kind of occurred. And then, Brand comes in and he's like, well, there was feudalism and there's all these other these rules ended up being very some sort of a tyranny, and this it can be tyrannical, within rules. Like even look at Nazi Germany, for example. He came up with all these new rules, and a lot of them were like fundamental, the Aryan race, and he had this fascist, crazy, occurring, very powerful, but I think it just goes to show that like discernment and wisdom.
There you go.
And having a heart of love and remembering that, the most important thing on this planet are people in their hearts.
Yeah.
That's what Christ died for.
Yeah.
That's what he died for. Well, Christ didn't die for rules. He didn't die for the Bible. He died for people. He died for human beings and souls and hearts. So it's like no one's ever going to get it right. In every epoch, it's like I want to apply. This up with Rollo.
I can apply something really cool to juxtapose.
Real quick
this.
Though, it's just in our tendency as human nature to do the overcorrecting.
100%.
To do the wham, bam, wham. And do that type of
because you're scared.
The history.
You're scared. But the irony of it is you're not outrunning that correction. You're actually reestablishing it in a different direction. Get rid of religion. You're still going to have the problem. Get rid of whatever you think is the vehicle for that human nature issue that you're dealing with. You're still going to have the problem. And that's what the law of the Old Testament expresses. Like God didn't want the Jews to have a king. He said, I am your king. I will be good enough. But they insisted on this, right? And so that kind of insistence on our own way and this is the best way, and each generation giving way to another one, and we all have to make our freaking, mark on our evolution as a species, is the arrogance of man. Every generation has that.
Reminds me of Ecclesiastes.
That's what all is vanity. And that's what the Old Testament by law is trying to teach us. It's like you could apply this to anything. It could be rationalism, sensationalism, progressivism, the romantic, all these different sort of epochs of change. But what's at the core of it, because once that sort of wedding moment is done, the excitement of the romantic period is done, you have people trying to control it. Just like doesn't have to be the faith. It could be something else. And that's what we're seeing with the politicized gender stuff, the politicized
it's used as a power
left and
move.
right. See,
Just
it turns
like
into
religion.
it's the power that people put on any ideology where it becomes, because of our innate nature towards faith. We have faith and we want to put it in something. And then somebody's going to know more about that and they're going to tell us what to do. So it's like you said, bottom line is humility towards Christ causes you to have discernment to be able to know what to do, how to handle it. There's not a book you can peel open besides the Bible that's going to inform you on that day of reckoning when it's the freshest thing. That's why I say there's no book, because it's never been encountered before, right? It's your generation's challenge. What is it that's going to help you? And that's why that's when you have the fear of God. That's kind of the way I begin to feel, is like that is really the only lifeline I have.
Well, if you read it, you see the stories. You get it from the beginning. You see a perfect world, and God had a purpose for it, He put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil there. He allowed Satan to do what he wanted to do and deceive Eve, to deceive Adam, so that he could have people have choice and to have a free will, so they would be something of similar to what he was, more different from the angels. They had a choice, and the angels did too, by the way. However,
obviously, look at Satan.
Yeah, so look at all them. But so if you read it and you see the stories, you'll see this over-course correction occurring all the time.
That's right. That's what the Old Testament's trying to teach you.
Let's go right to the law. Let's go right through here. You see, it's a historical
and
document.
Also the staleness, of the
you got
fatness.
to know that you get to know human nature through it.
That's
you
why,
get to know at the crux of it, like what ends up happening all the time.
What is the reoccurrent feature of humanity every generation?
Yeah,
what
so
is,
you're not.
Is it really
it's
feudalism and the
It's not a binary type of black and white deal going on.
It's not like Christianity caused feudalism. Or the Middle Age, or the medieval age. It's not. That didn't happen. That wasn't the reason. Humans caused that, and they perverted the vehicle of Christ. And in many ways, was the only light during those dark times in the world. So anyway, let's keep going. We're almost done. We talk too much.
to your faith, I wonder if it's even conceivable to envisage a Ben Shapiro without that, and how what your understanding is of people, like you said, like those rules that we're affording, people that don't have access to those rules or access to advantage.
Or feel marginalized by the rules or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So I wonder, that. See, I've got this hope, and do you share it? That all of us that are devout will at some point align necessarily because God is real. So we will naturally arrive at the point where the universals are expressed. Service of others, acceptance, gratitude, love, duty. These things will come through us to a point where all of the ephemera and, as you say, pragmatism, which I recognize these things are real. I have lived without means before, so I know what it's like to not be able to make the world do what you want it to do. These things will become somehow secondary, because isn't that the primary spiritual argument? Is it, Ben, I'm asking? The primary spiritual argument is, whilst our conduct is informed by this intimate, transcendent experience, we are prioritizing, and our behavior, we are prioritizing it. That is our ultimate reality. Our ultimate reality is God. It's ineffable. We only experience a tiny amount of all potential realities, but we feel this thing that's going to override our lust. It's going to override our greed. It's going to override our ego. And I feel that my optimism, as opposed to that your declared pessimism, is that if I do my best as a spiritual man, it's going to make the world better.
I mean, yes, but again, I think spirituality almost like, a dammed body of water, right? It's this huge dammed body of water with enormous kinetic power, right? It's gonna, when you unleash it, it's gonna be overwhelming. The question is, can you unleash it in channels that are going to generate actual useful power for people, or is it just kind of spill over? Does it diffuse? Does it evaporate? What you do with your spiritual power does require a set of channels in order for that to move. I mean, the way that I've started to think about, I keep going back to what is the ultimate purpose of human life. Yeah. The way that I like to think about it, and I think that because I think it's true, because I'm always right, of course. But it's if you go to a cemetery and you look at the headstones, that's the purpose of human life. Every headstone says the same thing: beloved father, beloved brother, beloved mother, rabbi, priest, right? Particular roles, teacher, right? Things that you did, roles that you filled for other people. You know what it doesn't say? How you felt about yourself. It doesn't say any of that crap on a tombstone. Because guess what? Nobody remembers that stuff. That's not the stuff that mattered about you. What you felt was not what mattered about you. What your relationship was with the world and the roles that you filled, that the world needed you to fill. That's that you were, by the way, forget about God for a second, that you were built by evolutionary biology to fill. Right? Those roles are vital. And if we deprive ourselves of those roles, which I think is what we've been steadily doing, those roles originally were developed. If you don't want to talk about God, let's not talk about God. They were developed by evolutionary biology and culture, which is a form of evolutionary biology in the end. They were developed by these things in order to mitigate against disease, death, famine, right? All of these things were built. You were a father because you were designed in order to create children and then protect those children and protect your wife. This is what you were created to do, right? Evolution has driven you to do this thing, which is why it's common across societies. These are the same thing is true of being a husband. The same thing is true of being a person who's curious about the world and seeking to create. Human beings have a natural propensity to create. Why? Because, again, creation allows you to provide more resources for your family. It also allows you to retain information for the future, right? All of these things are innovation, right? These are roles that human beings fulfill. And when you fulfill those roles, this is what makes life worth living. And so any system that destroys those things is a problem. Well, by becoming my favorite Bible verse lately has been a Bible verse that takes place in Deuteronomy, where it says, Jeshurun got fat and kicked. And basically the idea is, that Jeshurun being another name for Israel, the people of Israel, that we get fat and we kick. What it means is we get pretty self-satisfied, right? Death is far away. Disease is far away. All these things are far away. We don't need any of these roles anymore. We can explode all of those institutions. Do we need fathers in a society where somebody else can fill the bill, where money can come in and fit that bill? Do we need teachers in a world where you can just, kind of do what you want and you'll be taken care of? Do we need any of these roles? And the answer is, on a material level, no, you don't actually. You don't actually need those roles on a material level anymore. But guess what? Human beings were constructed to fulfill those roles, and I think one of the reasons you're seeing such chaos among men who feel completely lost, high levels of suicide, high levels of alienation, and among young women who are not engaging in I think, relationships that they feel are fulfilling. And you see, there was this video that was going around, if you saw this video from a podcast called Whatever of this young woman, and she uses the word like about 27 times in the course of about 45 seconds. But what she's saying is she's talking about, I hate talking stages. Talking stage is the worst. I had to look it up. I'm too old. Apparently a talking stage is something that the youngins are doing in terms of dating where they don't know whether they are dating or whether they are just hanging out or whether they're having sex or what exactly they're doing. And she feels obviously very dissatisfied with the situation. And the answer is we as a society exploded how these institutions are supposed to work. And then, of course, people feel chaotic and they feel lost. Those institutions are really, really, really important. There used to be an actual way that things were done. And those things were not just expressions of practicality. They were expressions of practicality because they were expressions of the human heart. And when you destroy those things, and when you liberate people, in a lot of cases, you're actually just releasing somebody outside of a spaceship and telling them to breathe. I mean, they're without a breathing apparatus. Like, okay, you're free. You don't have anything to rely upon. There's nothing impeding you. Also, there's no air.
So, well, that's the end of the interview. But so Ben is responding to Brandon saying, if I just am devout because I'm going to try my hardest to do something that I think is right. And he's like, well, it doesn't quite work that way. And we know that because everybody, so we talked about, they want to put their faith somewhere. Faith, as Ben is saying, is an evolutionary, biological instinct we have beyond anything. It's like
very
we have
powerful
to have
from 18 to 26.
We're more impressionable at that point, yeah.
Hormonally,
but
ready to jump on the bandwagon
for whatever, you know. And that's the point. It's like it's not whatever.
You'd be selling stinky fish heads. You'd be like, all right,
let's do it.
Save the fish heads.
Go for it, man. Like whatever said with this passion, it must be true, you know. So it's a learning experience for us all. But what he's saying is the fact that truth is exclusive. So these institutions by which we marry, these institutions by which we teach, is building a conscience and a critical thinking of our soul that allows us to actually progress. And so he's saying,
how he does it too is he brings up tombstones.
Well,
and he's like death, and he's like that's the ultimate like. It's like it doesn't matter what
is your
what
legacy?
you're doing.
Yeah,
you're gonna have to deal with death. Doesn't matter who you are. So like that's and then what they put on your epitaph is going to be like what you did with your life. So hopefully you did something with that life that makes your death worthwhile.
Well, ultimately what he's saying is that the things that are put on the tombstone are what you did for other people.
Yeah.
And that action is what counts overall. He's pretty harsh on saying there's no feeling, like your feelings don't matter, which I understand. Like these days, people need to be said your feelings don't matter. I mean, of course they do. They matter very much.
What he means
but
is like they're not the sole definer of your direction.
They're not.
They're not discernment.
Yeah,
it's not wisdom.
No, you can. The point is that if you have
sensuality
wisdom,
will bring you straight to hedonism.
Yeah,
and then you're going to be living a life of just blown out.
Like I see a third dimension of feeling that, you know, as I get older and more mature, I pay more attention to that third dimension. The first dimension is like, I don't like my suffering. The second dimension is like, well, why am I suffering? And then the third dimension is like, this is the right thing.
Do this, you'll feel better later.
Yeah, and or this is the right thing, and even if I don't, I just have to do it, right? Like it's sort of like he was saying, a devotion to a moral, ethical paradigm.
Maybe feeling better later is dying and knowing you're dying for
because
the right reason.
I won't feel well now that ultimately. I know about the third dimension of feeling. I won't feel better if I do the first, because I had ignorance on my side. You know, as being a young person where I could do that, and I would be like, well, I just didn't know. But now it's like, you don't have that excuse anymore. You do know, you stupid bastard. You have to do it, and that's the way it works. And so I see him trying to clear the air because these days, you know, he's talking to the majority, which is they're all obsessing over these fickle feelings that wash in and wash out. And it's like, well, what's it going to be today? That's just pure horror to me.
It's red
horror.
tide.
Like it just compounds the feeling of what do I do? Like you're always asking that question based on your feelings. That's hell. But
gross.
He talks about the Jews being fat. And as you read the Old Testament, this is again more of the law that you see that's not in the books of the law, like the laws in Kings, 1st and 2nd Samuel,
right?
When you're seeing the rulers, right?
These are like, here's what happened. This is the story. This is the conclusion of that story. So it's like, it's the sentiment, what they call like, it's the underlying theme. It's like the meaning of like why the story was told.
And that could be
not
said
a
for
law, but it is the truth of what happened.
No, it is a law, and that's where the way you should really interpret contextually the whole because you get the more, rigorous law, but that's what they were following. So now you can connect that to the book of Judges, Samuel, and everything else, see what was going on, because that is the I believe when I read, that's what the takeaway is.
That's why we make laws, because they're like, you did this shit and it didn't work, so now we have to do things like this so they work. So here's a law and a rule, so that we don't make the same mistake again.
Right, and then there's
things
trying
to save time.
Well, there's things in the Old Testament
shit over again,
where God will say, "I'm going to do this," and then anyway, the point that he's making, and I'll touch on that later, is that the Jews would, just like us in the West, get fat, and that's when they're like, "Well, let's
support,
just."
I got my Medicare, I got my food.
It's kind of like that old story: the emperor wears no clothes, right?
Yeah,
it's like all of a sudden you're just
naked.
Satan can come in and tell you, yeah, it's better to leave your babies, by themselves unattended for 12 hours. They'll be fine, or some dumb thing you would never think, and be like, well, this is being progressive.
Because it feels good.
Because I'm fat, and I just want the acclaim and attention of doing something progressive, so we'll just do anything, right? And so it degrades the community, and it always happens when you're sitting in a place of excess. But the Jews, I think the stories that I pay attention to and look at is like when Jesus says, or when God says, I'm going to punish you guys, my wrath is burning against you or something. And he doesn't. He acts in mercy.
Yeah.
And that's true for the Old Testament law. Like there's plenty of kids who talk back to their dads and moms, and they didn't get killed. They were acting in mercy. They were expressing.
Did?
Probably.
Man, yeah. I feel bad for those.
Depends on
I'd
the
be
time.
Dead.
Yeah.
Early on. Probably
first the hand would go.
4 years old, I'd be stoned.
Yeah,
immediately.
They hardly ever did that stuff. I mean,
I don't
even
know how
David,
they could have any
King David,
they probably figured that one out.
He
pretty
murdered
quick.
somebody
Probably
and
like,
raped
yo,
his...
dude, we keep stoning our kids. We're not gonna have any kids
left.
left.
Point. So again, what's the point of that law? The law is to show that kind of sin is what you deserve, bro. Like that's how severe sin is. So
for what?
For talking back, or stealing.
What is the verse precisely,
basically?
Bro?
Okay, so
don't curse your parents.
Yeah, or
talk back.
Basically, it's talking back. But
that's not. That one always.
Well,
got me.
Okay, you could say curse.
You have to talk back to your parents. Like you have to say
things
back to your
sounds
parents.
Brutal, right? Like
don't
talk
of course. Back.
Don't talk back.
Don't curse your parents.
Don't disobey your parents. Like when you're talking back, it's usually because you're not supposed to.
Because like back in the day.
But anyway, let me finish.
They were like, hey, don't go outside after 9 p.m. towards the beach with the snakes. It's gonna bite your nuts off.
Mm-hmm.
You might die. So the you not obeying your parents would mean death anyways.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the exact point.
That's why they said that.
That's why they said that back in the day, because sin leads to death. And if it was. It also is true in the new covenant. So if you're guilty for one sin, boom, you're not holy. You're not perfect. You have been stained. You cannot persist in God's glory for 1 millisecond, bro.
Like you got that white shirt. It's so nice.
And a piece of dog doo-doo right
or
there.
Like whatever. Spaghetti marinara.
The
whole thing
is
screwed, bro.
Yeah, it's
I don't care how white the rest of it is.
Yeah, lights the whole thing on fire.
To a date. You're never going to wear it out to a date. No. She's going to hone in on that speck of marinara dog turd.
Yeah.
And that's all only thing she's going to see.
Yep. And so like we learn from the Old Testament that these disciplinaries, these what you end up getting, it's not always applied. So like that's why it's important to understand the culture. Like this is why it's important to understand your own law. How many times does somebody he has never offended anybody, he has no crime history, we'll let him off with a slap on the wrist, right? And so it calls for wisdom, it calls for mercy, it calls for all these things.
And what's that going to cost?
Be wrapped.
He's going to be like, I got away with this. I stole Benny's bike. Maybe I'll try stealing Ginny's car. Yeah. And then it goes back, and then pretty soon the dude's
precipitates
in prison
into pure
for
death.
Life when he just could have had his ass beat for the bicycle and been like, never doing that again.
Well, yeah, you don't. Like, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
That sucked.
Well, that's too much merch. That's coddling. That's pandering. That's basically effectively ruining somebody. And I wouldn't even blame that person.
That's kind of going
at
on
that
right
point.
now, isn't it?
Well, that's what I was kind of getting to. Is like in the household. This is like the whole issue that the Iron Disciples talks about all the time. And that's the fight for the family, because the father is most of the time the disciplinarian. The father is going to be the guy to say, this is how bad this really is, and here's what you're going to do now to sort of make some restitution. Well,
the mom will be like, this is horrible, and she'd freak out, but she's like, but don't, hurt him.
Yeah, well, moms don't understand discipline.
And then, like, mom and dad's
I'm sure some
idea
of you guys got some moms who are good at laying down the chancla on the ass or whatever.
Columbia.
We certainly did. But we're just speaking very fundamentally right now. So it's not
fundamentally, we're living in an eat-a-pool mother lifestyle where, like, we have a bunch of grown, and I was talking about this with Rolo. Like, we bought a bunch of 20-year-old somethings, men, or not men, excuse me, they're boys. They're still sucking down the Capri Sun, playing video games, overweight, never had to work. They're too rich, just like you're saying. They're fat Israel, bro. It's like, we don't have to worry about disease. But when it comes time to getting a girl, then they're all of a sudden they're like, but why don't girls like my fat butt?
Yeah.
It's well, like, I think, tell you why.
Well, that's the whole idea of a wise man or a man leading his family is that man's supposed to have experience in the world. So because of that experience in the world, he's going to be able to dictate.
Which means
he's fast tracking his kids to success so that they don't have to make all the blunders he did. He's effectively acting as a surrogate conscience for them so that they can develop to the point where they're making good decisions. And he needs to be a respected, respectful, submitted, Christ-loving man in order to do that effectively. Because right now, because of the lack of Christ in the home, men can't make the right decisions. So the bleeding heart syndrome takes over. Oh, somebody's suffering. My son's suffering so much. They're suffering so much. What can we do to appease the suffering? Well, the only way the suffering can be appeased is through a solution, through a real solution, not by ignoring the problem. And men don't have the stones for that anymore. They don't have the balls for it.
Well, so if you're fat and you're living in a world where everything is,
what I don't like about some of the red pill is that they're saying we're not allowed, and it's like, dude, where's your warrior?
Bunch of garbage.
Where is your warrior spirit, bro? Like,
well,
you
that's
can
what I was
sit
saying.
here.
Like, the battle, men have to fight battles. It's obviously, this one guy in the comments was like, when I just tune out when I hear guys are just supposed to fight wars. I'm like, he's getting it all wrong. Like, obviously, this dude's not meant to go out there with a battle axe and start carving down dudes. Like, he's not meant for that.
Yeah, war is
your
different.
battle, and that's why I was like, obviously, you didn't listen to the rest of the podcast. So I bring up Ephesians, and the battles are through principles, spiritual. Like, it's a mental. It's much more than just a physical battle. Dumbass. Like, obviously, you're not fighting with a sword every day. That would be so much easier.
It's like ignoring the whole book of Proverbs.
But
like,
you're
the
going to
soft
fight
answer turns away wrath. Like, we are using different tactics. When we say we're in a battle, it's because life and death. People are dying and people are living. That's the only commonality we have with it, because it's life and death, and it's for freedom. So our tools that we use, so somebody's going to say, we're a warrior. Iron disciples are warriors. You think we're like taking our Bibles and slapping people in the face. That's not the way we go about doing it. You're going to slap people in the face with your example.
Smack yourself
that
in
they're
the
going to
face.
say to themselves in the middle of the night,
Smack yourself
why is
in
that
the
person
face.
doing that? We do. That's what we're supposed to do, is sort of self-discipline and self-persecute.
Gross.
But that's something that is lacking from the church, which in turn is creating weaker men.
Well, I'd like to bring this back to rules, because when you get fat and like you have all this ease in living, then you don't have the necessity to fight battles, because you don't have any battles that you have to fight.
Well, it's a catch-22.
Hold on. So therefore, you have to do the training, and you have to basically create battles when you'd be rather sitting around doing nothing, to strengthen yourself in the case that they're going to happen, right? Which you could call self-persecution. You could call this discipline.
Humility.
You could call this insanity, because why would you do that? Look at around you. There's no reason to be doing these things. You're freaking out. The sky's not falling. There's no one breaking down your door. There's all this food in the grocery store.
It's a blind person.
Why in the world would you spend your time doing that?
It's a blind person saying that.
Well, this is what people do. They use a rationality to say...
It's not rational at all to say that.
Well, it's taking a fine scoped lens over what's happening right now versus what happens historically, which is why history and reading the Bible is so important, because you know that you have to be prepared and you have to be ready, even though you might not have encountered these things. That's why the Navy SEALs go through Hell Week, because they have to know they're going to be putting up with hell in the future. Doesn't mean that they might never put up with something as bad as Hell Week. Maybe they'll put up with something worse than Hell Week.
Yeah.
But the idea is that as a man, you have to prepare your kids for that. And a lot of the women don't want to see their little baby put through Hell Week, because he might not have to do it. It might damage him. It might traumatize. It might hurt his feelings.
People forget Hell Week's coming no matter what you do.
He might
you can
change
put it off,
him as a person.
Coming.
It's like, well, yes, it's going to change.
Yeah.
That's the point. We want him to change, all right? We don't want to keep him a boy forever. We want to keep him a man. We want to turn him into a man that becomes a father that can do the same thing for his kids in the future.
Yeah, and don't get it wrong here, guys. Like when you're a young guy, you don't have the earned experience to put yourself on a woman that the way Andrew Tate or some of these guys do. Even if you have a lot of money, doesn't necessarily mean you've cultured the spiritual guidance by virtue of your commitment and devotion to your faith to be able to lead somebody else's life, spiritually speaking, become the pastor of the home. So you have to be humble as this progression takes place, because discernment grows as your faith grows, as your walk grows, as Christ is allowed to animate your body more completely. So that's something you need to be very honest with, because these things are like, yeah, I'm a man, I got to be in control, I got to do these things. And the bottom line is you're just taking on a really sort of quiet job that you're not going to get the pats on the back. You're not going to. This is the preparing. What did Christ get? He got crucified. So you need to internalize this idea of reward and how you're looked at and the perception of this job. So you understand that this is not the worldly paradigm of success and leadership. This is not the worldly paradigm of warrior. This is a completely different thing. But the same thing is at stake. It's lives. It's life.
Which is why you bring
death.
up the Stoics and the asceticism and like
Sure.
more of these guys like Marcus Aurelius. Some of the best leaders in the world
Seneca.
internalized these things because they knew and they had seen, they were students of other leaders that had failed, and they saw this is the Achilles heel over and over and over again. And a lot of times it was emotionalism. A lot of times it was the need to be respected.
Well, men have that hard job to be able to listen to their wives or their kids, know exactly feel the pain. Not be so stoic that it's like you're very distant.
It's not stonewalling.
And that's not stonewalling. It's not bulldozing. It's none of those things.
No.
But what you're doing is you're sort of, as Christ dealt with I love these apostles and disciples, and I love the fact that they were such a difficult group of guys.
Oh, yeah.
I love the fact that Jesus had to
Cantankerous,
rebuke
bro.
them all the time. So it's like, how did Jesus handle these guys, his little chickens? And they were always trying to tell him what to do, how to do it. He was Jesus, so your family life is not going to be guys who are insubordinate to you. Your wife's just like, what can I do? That's not the
Here's
right
a
way.
sandwich, honey.
Yeah, no. Anyway, we're going way off topic. So, fun
As
talking.
usual.
We missed Mike today. Mike has been kicking his butt working, so he's in the background
He's
today.
pulling the tomahawk out repeatedly today. Just chomp.
Axe murdering problems.
Yeah.
Left and right.
That's what he does
It's
best.
a bloody mess, but he's going to handle it.
Yep.
So we can end in a prayer, and next time we'll have Mike Amiss with us.
Mike Emilius. Father, thank you for this opportunity to get together and talk. Lord, thank you for Russell Brand and our buddy, what's his name, John? Ben Shapiro. Thank you for these guys and their hearts. And especially Russell, because, he's out there kind of wasn't steeped in it, and he's really finding his own way. And I think that his love for his family and, the life that he lived, Lord, you know it better than I do, but he was in deep into the worldliness and just being a rock star. So it's great to see him do that, and it's beautiful and encouraging. And thank you, Lord, for all the men out there. I pray that you will build them up and show them how to listen to your little voice, Lord, and follow the golden thread. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.